Leaders' questions under Standing Order 36. I call on Deputy Louise O'Reilly, please.
Count Corla. Taoiseach, I want to raise with you a long-standing issue that stretches back almost 15 years. That is the pay dispute involving thousands of Section 39, Section 10 and Section 56 workers who haven't had a meaningful pay increase for those 15 years. As you will agree, I'm sure, Taoiseach, that naming just the sections 39s, 56s and 10s does a grave disservice to these workers and indeed to the people who depend on the services. These workers are on the front line. They provide essential services every day of the week across health, disability, family support, children, care of older persons, homelessness and addiction. The workers and their trade unions, SIP2, INMO and Forza, have been campaigning to resolve these pay issues and secure pay parity for years now. They are in a situation where they're being paid the same rate in 2023 that they were in 2008. And Taoiseach, you and I very well know that nothing costs the same today as it did in 2008. These vital agencies are experiencing a recruitment and retention crisis. I've seen this for myself, Taoiseach, and I'm sure you're aware of it. I recently visited St Aidan's in Gorey. The service there, they provide overnight respite, residential and day services for people with intellectual disabilities. The service is really cherished by the local community, by the service users, by their families and by the workers who are there. But they are losing staff on a daily basis. They're losing staff to retail, to areas they don't necessarily want to go and work. These are people who are trained healthcare professionals, but they're losing staff on a daily basis and they don't know how they're going to fill the slots on the roster. As a result of the failure to resolve this dispute, workers in the community and voluntary sector are to commence indefinite strike action from the 17th of October. This will impact on users of services like Cheshire Ireland, Ability West, Co-Action West Cork, Cove Hospital, Daughters of Charity and Family Services, DePaul Ireland, Enable Ireland and the Irish Wheelchair Association and many more. Taoiseach, to think of the people who rely on these services, children with disabilities, older people. Think of their families and the impact that losing these vital services will have on the quality of their lives. I'm conscious, Taoiseach, of the effect this is having on children's disability network teams in particular. We've discussed this many times in this House, the impact on children unable to get assessments, unable to access services and unable to access treatments. Families and service users need to be central to any discussions around this strike. If this strike action is not averted by government, then the state and the HSE have to step in to provide these services directly. If the industrial action is not averted and the HSE cannot provide these services, then families will have to take annual leave. They might have to pay for private services if they have it, and many of them don't, or they'll have to leave their loved ones go without. All of this has an impact on vulnerable service users like children with disabilities and older people. It also has a huge impact on their families and their loved ones. People wait years for assessments or for an appointment with a vital therapy service. These are going to be cancelled from the 17th of October, and the families and service users are starting to get very worried as to whether there will be a replacement service and what, if any, planning is being done for a catch-up if they are forced to miss out. If the government doesn't resolve this dispute, then the immediate and ripple impact of strike action won't leave a single person unaffected. Please, Taoiseach, will you give a commitment that the government will engage with the workers and their trade unions in a meaningful way, in good faith, so positive outcomes can be achieved through constructive negotiation and the aversion of this industrial action? And Taoiseach, if the industrial action does go ahead, will you give a commitment that the HSE will step in and provide these vital services?
First of all, appreciate the Deputy raising this issue, and I am very well aware of the historic nature of this, particularly in the context of the restoration of FEMPI and the basis upon, or the differentials, if you like, between public service employees in the context of restoration of FEMPI and those working in Section 39 organisations who didn't get the same level of restoration. But it is a more complex terrain in terms of the multiplicity of organisations, scale and size of organisations, and clearly an issue there. We don't in any way disagree that there's an issue there that needs to be resolved, and I'm conscious that the Department of Children I'd say that in short for the long title, has engaged with the trade unions in relation to this, and we understand the staff and recruitment issues that arise because of emerging pay differentials. Notwithstanding, historic allocations in more general terms in terms of disability funding over the last 3 years, which has been quite significant. But nonetheless, there are significant issues here. Now, officials from the Department of Children Equality, Disability Integration Youth, they met with and the Department of Health, the HSE Tuesday. They attended a number of engagements at the Work Relations Committee over recent months with the trade unions. That process culminated in an offer being made to unions. The offer was in line with those accepted by community and voluntary staff in other sectors. I think it was amounted to about a 5% increase in funding for pay effective from November 2023, with 3% backdated to April 2023. A commitment to re-engage with trade unions representatives following any further public sector pay agreement was also offered. Now, that offer remains on the table. That offer was not acceptable to the trade union representatives, and then subsequently the decision was taken to take strike action. I would hope that strike action can be averted, and I would urge that all sides would revert back to the negotiating table, because the industrial action will negatively impact on people who use these vital services. And I would encourage unions, employers to re-engage. The department is available to go back into the Workplace Relations Committee. The Department of Public Expenditure and Reform is very conscious of the issue. There's ongoing dialogue going on with the Department of Health in respect of the overall budget for 2024. So I genuinely believe that, notwithstanding the fact that the process to date has not yielded a resolution, I think the mechanism by which we can deal with this has to be the industrial relations mechanisms to avoid a negative impact on those who use the services. And I'm very conscious of the issues here. I think we need a just and fair resolution. We need a just and fair resolution that is sustainable into the future in respect of future pay agreements. And that has to be in an overall context, because the trend in the last decade has been you settle the public service pay agreement first, and then we enter into discussions with the Section 39 organisations. My view is that the overall framework has to be sustainable into the future for these organisations, because they're providing vital public services. I acknowledge that. And that's, I think, within that framework there should be a mechanism to try and resolve this. Notwithstanding the complexities, these are privately funded, well, no, sorry, they're statutorily or legally private. They're not public service organisations, that's the point I'm making. And they vary pretty significantly in size, scale, and all of that.
Deputy O'Reilly.
They're not public service organisations, but they are providing public services, and they're doing it on wage rates that are way behind those who are their exact and direct equivalent within the public service. Now, you say that you hope the dispute will be resolved. Well, I mean, you can do a little bit more than hope, Taoiseach. You can actually be proactive about it, and I do think that's what the families want to see. Bear in mind, these workers don't want to be on strike. That is the last thing that they want to do. I know this. I know these workers well. I represented them. They do not want to have to do this. They're doing it because they have no option. Now, you reference the community sector, and I do think that's somewhat disingenuous, if I can say that, because there isn't a direct comparator. But where there is a direct comparator is within the public service, within the HSE, within the statutory agency. So we know that they have a direct comparator, and we know that traditionally they would have been linked to those organisations, and that link was broken. So what I'm asking you, Taoiseach, is, one, will you ensure that there is proactive, good faith engagement at the WRC? And that means decision makers being in the room. And if that necessitates officials from the Department of Finance, well, they should be there. And two, if this strike goes ahead, is there provision there to maintain the service for those families and service users?
First of all, in the context of use of the word hope, I believe it can be resolved. I believe this issue can be resolved. And the Department of Children officials have, as recently as Tuesday, engaged with the trade unions on the issue. And there will be further engagement next week. Minister O'Gorman has informed me of that, and then Minister Rabbitt is very strongly over this. And as far as I'm concerned, this is a priority issue that we need to resolve. And I've been a strong advocate for the resolution of this issue within government, and we all collectively accept the issues. But then accepting, acknowledging this has built up over a decade. The important focus has to be on the process, and the industrial relations process is the process to resolve this, the WRC or the Labour Court. And in my view, that's where we should put our energies together. There's a commitment and there's a will to try and get this resolved, not just in the short term, but I do think we need a more sustainable framework over the medium to longer term in respect of these organisations who are providing vital services to many people across the country.
Deputy Jennifer Whitmore, please.
Taoiseach, last year Roderick O'Gorman said he wanted to halve childcare fees over 2 budgets. Given that he is the Children's Minister with the power to slash fees, there was an assumption that he was serious about that promise to parents. It started out well with an average 25% reduction last year, but cracks in the commitment have appeared. In June, the Taoiseach cast doubt on whether fees will be cut by 50%. Last month, the Irish Examiner reported the Minister was also wavering on the pledge. Yesterday, the media were again being briefed it was unlikely the full 50% cut will be delivered. Taoiseach, why do senior ministers of your government view promises to parents as non-binding? Instead of being focused on cutting fees, ministers seem more concerned with trying to manage expectations down. Maybe you can provide some clarity here today. A commitment was given last year. Does that commitment now lie in shreds, Taoiseach? And instead of reneging on promises to parents, you should be trying to do more. The Social Democrats have proposed a radical reform which would result in paid parental leave being extended for the first 12 months of a baby's life. This would mean an additional 12 weeks of paid leave split between parents. Not only that, but we would increase the rate of maternity, paternity, parents and adoptive leave from benefit from €262 per week to €350 per week. This is a measure that would make a huge difference to parents who can struggle financially when a new baby is born, especially if their employer does not top their maternity or paternity benefit up. New parents should be entirely focused on spending and enjoying this important time with their babies, not worrying about bills. We know that about 45% of women do not receive a top-up from their employer when they take maternity leave. This can leave a huge hole in family finances at a very expensive time. Perhaps this explains why fewer than 50% of fathers take the meagre 2 weeks of paternity leave that they are entitled to. Should I wait until you're finished, Taoiseach? Taoiseach, should I stop until you're finished talking? Thanks. When parents are dependent on 2 incomes to pay rent, the mortgage, soaring energy bills and all the costs associated with having a new baby, they decide that one parent must remain at work. This doesn't mean the fathers don't want to spend this important time with their newborns. They just cannot afford to. So Taoiseach, you could do something about that. You could commit and do bigger and better for new parents. Will you honour your commitment to cut childcare fees by a further 25% next week? And will you adopt the Social Democrats' proposal and increase paid parental leave to 12 months and increase the benefit to €350 per week? Thank you.
More generous in her commentary in respect of Minister Gorman and childcare generally, because I think without question the last 2 to 3 years has witnessed a transformation in terms of the scale of funding to childcare, particularly in terms of workers within the childcare sector when the JLC agreement was arrived at, which was accepted by the social partners as a very significant breakthrough. And then when you add the fees free last year and the allocation which resulted in a 25% reduction. I mean, these are very significant progressive decisions that government has taken and the minister has initiated and pushed. And obviously we're in a budget round now of negotiations. I think as you know, we've tabled about 5.8 billion of an increase overall in government expenditure. In your proposals, I believe you've tabled an increase in spending of about 17.4 billion. No, but the context, through the chair now, the context is very important because there's a huge difference between 6 billion and 17 billion of an expenditure, which is what you're proposing. And the credibility of that needs examination. Now, I accept that you're proposing tax hikes of $1 billion to pay for this, and a new tax rate of 43%. Fair enough, you're saying you want to tax much, much more to create revenue. What we're saying is we want to prioritise, we have prioritised childcare so far in the last 2 budgets. We've done it in a step-by-step approach with a very significant improvement in terms of reducing fees. And obviously the Minister, I'm not going to preempt the budget negotiations between the Minister and the Minister of Public Expenditure. The bilaterals are underway. There's an overall budgetary framework. That's why I mentioned that, because that is relevant in terms of all of the government departments have to be within a particular ceiling of expenditure. We believe that's sustainable. And we also want to protect for the future and build for the future of this country in terms of our approach to sustainable funding and finances. So, I would say to you that our commitment to progress in childcare stays, but I'm not getting into specifics today, a week ahead of the budget, and I think the Minister is still engaging with the Minister for Public Expenditure on this and indeed on other issues. We're conscious also of some services have come forward in respect of how they perceive the application of the schemes that were introduced last year, and the Minister is open to engaging and discussing with people. But by and large, it's important to point out that the number of services that have closed so far in 2023 is lower than the numbers that closed in 2021 and 2022. I think we've made substantial progress. It is our commitment to continue to add to that progress, and the next budget, or this budget, should reflect that. More.
Try and muddy the waters as much as you like. The fact is, and the context that's important here is, the Minister made a commitment to reduce the cost of childcare for parents by 50%. That was the promise, that was the commitment, and the question now for your government is whether you are actually going to meet that commitment. That is the only question that you had to answer, yes or no. In the budget next week, will parents be able to rely on that commitment that the Minister gave 2 years ago? Because parents, they need to know what's going to happen next week, and as well as that, they also need to know that they can trust these commitments. If a promise is made for 50% reduction, that should be in place now. It shouldn't be in negotiations. It shouldn't be at the point where there's still discussions happening between the Minister and the Finance Minister. That commitment was made 2 years ago. So the question for you is your government going to meet the commitment that you made to parents, or are you going to leave them behind yet again? Because what we've seen is over successive governments, the role of parents is forgotten. The impact of having a new family is forgotten by this government. So are you going to meet your commitment to reduce childcare costs by 50%? Yes or no? And that's all you have to say in your minute.
I think that's an outrageous assertion to make that the needs of children has been forgotten by this government. It doesn't stack up at all across the full range of measures that we've taken in the last 3 budgets in respect of childcare more generally, but also in terms of support of maternal care leave and so on like that. We've done a whole range of measures. It's not a credible, through the Chair, I don't believe it's a credible or fair assertion to make that you just made. It just defies any realistic understanding. And we have, over the last 2 years, in respect of childcare costs, met our commitments. And the more significant commitment, I think, being improving the status, paying conditions of workers, working with the social partners in terms of a new GLC framework for people working in the childcare sector, which gives sustainability to the childcare sector and continuity in terms of career pathways, which is key and crucial. And then in terms of fees freeze last year, and parents did feel it in their pockets last year, the reduction in childcare. Parents have said this to me. Probably one of the most significant cuts in childcare costs happened last year, and I accept your advocacy for this year, and there are budget negotiations underway.
Thank you.
And
the time is up.
It's a week to go, and there'll be full clarity in respect of that next week.
Now we move to Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett.
Ahead of next Tuesday's budget, this Saturday at 1 o'clock at Parnell Square, trade unionists, pensioners, students, people with disability, housing activists and many, many more will take to the streets to march to the Dáil. They will be marching because they are being absolutely crucified with the cost of living crisis and the housing and accommodation crisis. Mortgage holders paying thousands extra in interest, hundreds of thousands of householders in arrears on their energy bills, families hammered with childcare costs, renters paying absolutely unaffordable rents if they can even find a place to live. But all of this hardship and suffering is happening at a time when the government has an unprecedented budget surplus, projected to be 16 billion next year, when the country is wealthier than it has ever been, according to the central bank. Aggregate household wealth over €1 trillion this year, and when corporate profits have nearly quadrupled in the last 10 years. Yet in advance of the budget, the government is playing down expectations, saying we can't protect everybody against the cost of living hikes because it would cause inflation. Now, I want to put it to you ahead of the budget that this is a false and dishonest narrative. First of all, it is not inflationary simply to maintain the value of people's incomes. It is not inflationary to keep people out of poverty, and it is not inflationary to provide affordable housing. And secondly, that the real problem that you refuse to acknowledge is greedflation, profiteering by the banks, by the supermarket chains, by the property developers, by the corporate landlords. This is their problem. And I'll just take one example and ask you about it. The inequality in the distribution of wealth. I mentioned for the first time, according to the central bank, over €1 trillion in aggregate wealth. Helpfully, the central bank also set out the distribution of that wealth earlier this year. Do you know what they found? That the richest 10% of people in this country own 54% of all of that wealth. 10% own €540 billion more than all of the rest of society, the other 90% combined. That's the truth. That's why you won't give people what they need to address the suffering, the hardship and the housing crisis, because you're protecting a tiny few who have all the wealth and all the profits. So will you, to pay to fund the housing, affordable housing we need, to address poverty, to fund our public services, introduce a wealth tax to redistribute the wealth that exists in this country, to give it to the many and stop protecting the few who control all that wealth?
Tánaiste, please.
First of all, I would dispute the Deputy's presentation of the facts, or the facts as he puts them, or the position that he's adopting here. First of all, the government is very committed to protecting people against the cost of living increases. Last year we provided €12 billion in respect of cushioning the impact of rising prices on households, on businesses and farmers. The ESRI, and I note you didn't quote the ESRI, found that once-off measures announced as part of Budget 23, and if you combine that with the core increases, insulated most households from rising energy prices last winter. And if you look at the lowest four income deciles were cushioned against the inflationary spiral last year by the measures that we took, the combination of core social protection measures, public service pay agreements, and you take tax relief, and then the once-off. Combine all of that, the lowest income groups were cushioned. That's ESRI data, not my data, Deputy. And it is our intention in this budget to continue to cushion people, because next year living standards will rise above inflation. Inflation is on a downward trajectory over the next 12 months. And when you combine the various measures we will take, with pay and tax relief and so on, and all of that, living standards next year, it is our projection, will increase. The government's commitment is to a fair budget. It's fair to workers, and we need to be fair to those who are out there working, to our tax measures that we will adopt, and indeed in terms of other supports that we can provide and will provide, both in terms of a once-off cost of living package married to then, in terms of those on social welfare protection measures, to enable them to come through this winter. Because certain prices, no question, are high, and people are under a lot of pressure. On housing, we have record investment in housing in this country. We have very high revenues coming in. They are tapering a bit. That's not government cushioning or managing expectations. The figures speak for themselves. In other words, the significant increases we had in corporation tax, we still have very healthy corporation tax, healthy income tax coming in, all signs of a buoyant economy, because we have full employment in the economy. Now, I suggest respectfully that the measures that you are proposing more generally in the economy, I think would, over time, undermine the employment story in Ireland. Because I think you're anti-enterprise, clearly. You don't believe in a free market economy. You don't believe that enterprises should make profit. I'm talking about even small to medium-sized companies. You're against trade deals. Most small to medium-sized countries in this country want to engage in free trade. You're against it. So I think your policies would undermine the enterprise economy that has resulted in very high employment in this country and career progression.
Deputy Boyd Barrett.
What I don't believe is that in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, it is acceptable that we have record numbers of families and children, worst of all, living in homeless accommodation. I don't accept that a whole generation of young people are being crucified with unaffordable rents and can never hope to own their own home. I don't accept that there are now more than 250,000 people who are in arrears on their energy bills because of energy price hikes. I don't accept that 17% of the population in this country suffer deprivation. I don't accept that workers have lost about 10% in real terms of their income because of cost of living hikes, while the corporations have seen their profits quadruple. While ESB, 679 million in the first 6 months of this year, double what it earned 2 years ago. The banks are recording extraordinary profits, and as I said, our figures are from the central bank, when the richest 10% of our population own more wealth than everybody else. Are you going to address that inequality? Are you going to use the wealth that exists in our society to actually protect working people, pensioners, students, the least well off, from the hammering they are getting from the cost of living crisis, and address the housing disaster?
We addressed the cost of living issues last year in an unprecedented way, and in a way that no other government in Europe did, in terms of the scale of our intervention, in a whole range of measures at social protection, double payments, all of that. 12 billion alone last year. And we're going to do similar actions this year in terms of interventions to protect people. And it is our view that living standards will improve in 2024. And Deputy, you need to acknowledge that, notwithstanding the different political ideology, which you're entitled to have, we have 2.64 million people working in this country today. Our economy added nearly 90,000 jobs over the past year. For a total of more than 500,000 jobs since we entered government in 2020, 500,000 additional jobs. The share of people in Ireland who have jobs is at a record high of 74%, with unemployment at an exceptionally low rate of 4.2%. Youth unemployment is the lowest on record and amongst the lowest in the European Union, and our population rose by nearly 100,000 people over the year to the end of April 2023. That's an alternative.
Thank you.
And there's much more I could say. But we are committed in the budget to protecting people, particularly those on lowest incomes, from the very significant and acknowledged pressures of cost of living increases.
We move now to the regional group. Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick, please.
The Department Pension Reform and Taxation Group was established to carry out a number of tasks for pensions reforms. A roadmap. The roadmap set out was the need to promote long-term pension savings to address the income adequacy, in particular for low-income earners. Like, the main income for the majority of older people is a pension. Last week I had a meeting with Minister for Finance and Minister for Public Expenditure, and we called for a thorough review of tax credits and the social welfare system to ensure that employment and paying into a pension is financially rewarding. However, Taoiseach, this is not true. One of my constituency, aged 61, came to my clinic last week and is barely making ends meet. He has lost his job and is forced to live on a small pension of €1,100 a month. That's €275 a week. The issue I have today is that after working for 40 years, this man has been punished for paying into a private pension. Let me explain why. This man, who is 5 years off his pensioning age, applied for job seekers in the interim of finding a new job. He was offered a flat, qualified adult rate of €366 for himself and his wife. However, because he's getting a private pension, this job seeker's rate is being means tested. This means a deduction of €269 off his flat, qualified adult rate of €366. This man and woman have to live on €275 from his private pension, plus a top of only €97 from social welfare. This makes it at €372 a week for two adults to survive. The system is wrong. How do you expect a man and his wife to survive on that? They are already struggling to put food on the table, heat their homes, can't afford to maintain their house. This is only set to get worse as the winter progresses. The means test needs to be evaluated immediately. This couple are €6 better off by having a private pension. They're claiming social welfare. They might as well not have a pension. In fact, they're being penalised for contributing to a pension. The couple have no savings, they have no other income, and they expect to live in 366 years. Taoiseach, will your government consider in the finance bill and budget of maybe overturning this means test? I don't personally think it's fit for purpose. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm only talking about small pensions at the moment. I'm not talking about people who's putting hundreds of thousands into pensions. I'm just trying to say is, and this is happening a lot, families coming into me and the husband worked 40 years and she is looking after the children for the last 30 or 40 years. And they contribute to a pension, and he lost his job, nothing to do with him good self. Now, if he hadn't worked and he was claiming social welfare and she was claiming social welfare, they'd be nearly 150 years better off. So I'm just trying to say to you, it's your government, and in fairness to the Minister of Finance, there is, you're trying to encourage people down the road to, you know, that you can't really survive on job seekers' monies or a pension out there. You need to have a private pension. So I'm just trying to say to you, how can I encourage people who make constituency office on small income to contribute towards a pension when these things are happening? Taoiseach, I have these people's names and numbers and I'll give them later on. But listen, I'm finding it very hard to look these people straight in the eye. Can you please tell me that something will be done in the budget next week for these people?
For raising the issue and for obviously raising a more general issue through an individual case that has come to your constituency office. That highlights wider issues in terms of pension entitlements, pension contributions, job seeker allowance. And I think you said the person was 61 years of age. Obviously, the department, and he has worked for 40 years, to be fair. The Department of Social Protection is available to help in terms of sourcing alternative employment, if that's... Sorry? But it's there. It is there. It is there, and it should be there. And I'll certainly take the details off you. But it is there, and the office exists to try and help people to secure alternative employment. But also, I don't know the background in terms of the means test, in terms of the issues that were assessed or not assessed. And you have said, I mean, normally the assessment involves the household's income, savings, shares, investments or property, apart from a person's home. Now, you've made it clear the person has no savings. Again, I will revert to the Minister of Social Protection, but perhaps if you can send us the details so we could examine it in more detail afterwards, because I can't discuss individual cases here, obviously, on the floor of the House. I don't know the full background to it. But obviously, government is anxious that people who, that we incentivise people to work in the first instance, but also that there would be basic amounts to enable people to survive. And your basic point is that the private pension is militating against the person getting a decent job seeker's allowance. I think that's the key point you're making here. And that may have to do with the thresholds or maybe factors that I'm not aware of in respect of the details of the case itself. But nonetheless, if you can send me on the details, I'll certainly pursue it. And then, certainly in terms of any policy implications, we can pursue those also, both in the budgetary context or in the social welfare bill that would be subsequent to the budget.
I find Minister McGrath very approachable, a very good minister. But I'm just going to tell you the facts again. This man has worked 40 years. He's 61. His wife is 60. He worked for 40 years. She stayed at home minding the children. He contributed towards a small pension. it was 270 odd euros of a pension, and then we went to look for job seekers because he is looking for a job, and job benefits. They're offering him 97 euros on top of his pension. That comes to 366 euros. To me, that doesn't seem right. Like I'm not just saying, like we're all getting older, and your government are encouraging people to contribute towards pensions, and they are contributing towards pensions. But the case I have at the moment is this family being better off not working. If she was getting a social welfare and he was getting a social welfare, they'd be getting nearly 500 euros a week. So if he's contributed the last 40 years and lost a job. They sat in my office last Friday. I didn't believe them. We get on the social welfare, and the facts are true. That's the way it is. So I'm trying to say to you, if you want people to contribute towards a pension, then always someone they're redundant and to draw down the pension, then it's means-tested. Like, I could understand if that was 500 or 1,000 euros a week to getting towards their pension. It's not. It's only a small minimum fare. Like, their families all around. They're afraid now if something breaks down in the house, they can't afford to do it. And they're embarrassed. I'll be honest, come in to see me, and I know them pretty well. Even come in to see me and tell me what the problem was.
Right, Deputy,
Minister
please.
for Finance does something seriously wrong there. Thank you, very sorry.
9 months, he would have got 9 months job. No, sorry, he would have got 9 months job benefit as he was made employed, which would have been higher than, based on his contributions and so on, it would have been higher than the job seekers allowance. I presume the 9 months has elapsed, and now he's on job seekers allowance. There is exceptional needs payments if there's any particular issues that arise. But again, I don't have the background to the case. The Minister has looked at, we have been looking at DUX in terms of the broader pension reforms and PRSI treatment, but that would involve potentially over time increasing PRSI with a view to lengthening the period that a person would be on job seekers benefit, and also increasing the level of job seekers benefit that would be more approximate to the salary that the person had been earning prior to being rendered unemployed. So there are reforms that are required, but they do have significant resource implications, and the Minister has been examining that issue, which we used to have historically in the past. So, for example, if you were unemployed, you might get up to 2/3 or 60% of your wage back in the day. That was changed and reformed, and the balance always has been around job incentivisation. But we learned from COVID that people can lose their jobs through no fault of their own.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And therefore
We're
they do
over time
need
again,
a cushion to get them through difficult periods. But thank the Deputy
Thank you
for
very much.
raising
That then concludes